G'day and welcome back to Reality Check Question and Answer. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart, and let's bring in my friend and colleague, Meagan Ourada, who's going to skewer me with all these questions you've got from the last couple of weeks of viewing. Meagan.
Yes, Ross, we have a ton of questions, but before we get to all of those, I want to begin by asking you about this new Tic Tac video. It was just released by our colleague George Knapp and Jeremy Cobell. I'll pull it up right now for our viewers. Witnesses are saying that this new video is for UAPs that look just like the famous Tic Tac sighting from 2004. What's your reaction, Ross?
I think it's great. I mean, good on Jeremy and George yet again for pulling out of the Christmas stocking another exciting video. It was George and Jeremy who, in 2019, the 29 videos that they obtained of US warships off the west coast of the USA being buzzed by drones, it's quite clear that the US Navy is seeing a lot of anomalous activity on the west coast in particular. But a lot of it is being suppressed and not talked about. And good on George and Jeremy, and more importantly, good on their sources for making this information publicly available. It is very significant. It does show an anomalous looking object that looks like a Tic Tac. And frankly, other than that, there's not a lot more I can say because, as usual, the Defence Department has its head in the sand and is declining much further comment on the issue.
Okay, Ross, thank you for that. Now let's get into the Q&A. We've had a lot of engagement about Skywatcher and your interview with Jake and Matt. So we will get started with Eli Orr. Hey, Ross, do you have any plans to interview any of the psionics from Skywatcher anytime soon? I would love to know more about their background and how they were trained and became involved in the program. I also remember an interview with Jake Barber mentioning that they came from an organization of some sort that explored consciousness that provided these assets. Could that possibly be the Monroe Institute?
A lot of questions in there, but I'll try and answer them all. And if I don't remember them, Meagan, I'm sure you'll tell me what I've missed. I know Jordan and James, who are two of the psionics working with Skywatcher, and they're very good people. And I've seen Jordan's abilities particularly up close at Esalen. It was Jordan who was involved in the summoning that I witnessed at Esalen on the west coast near San Francisco. And I saw him psionically, how does one say this, engage with the phenomenon. And as he was telling me, we were going to see a blue orb that night, and eventually a blue orb did arrive. But what I personally saw were two golden orbs coming closer and closer towards us and my camera. And it was cool. I don't know if I can explain it. I certainly am convinced that there is some kind of ability of human consciousness to engage with the phenomenon. James, you'll also get to meet these guys, by the way. James is another of the psionics. I think both of them will probably be featured in the program that Skywatch is doing as their next episode. I'm not privy to that episode. I have no idea what they're filming, but I did notice that in the current program, they've said that they'll be talking more about the psionics. What were the other questions in that long-winded question that he asked us, Meagan?
Could it possibly be the Monroe Institute?
Oh, yeah, look, Monroe, I mean, there's a lot of people, this as they acknowledge in their documentary, their mini episode, the process by which they're using psionic engagement with the phenomenon, whatever it is not new. There's Dr. Stephen Greer's CE5, which has been used successfully and I think convincingly by Greer for many years. And more importantly, there are people who've contacted me ever since I first talked about psionics last year, telling me that they have an ability to somehow consciously connect with the phenomenon. I'm talking to people here in Australia, for example, who sent me astonishing videos of them literally talking to objects on camera, and then these objects seem to respond in some way. I wish I could explain it. I wish I had all the answers. I wish I could explain how psionics works. It's a very, very exciting area of science, and much as the skeptics and debunkers will try and stick it all back in a sock and say it's rubbish and paranormal nonsense, I think we are on the cusp of a new paradigm. I think that there is a link between human consciousness and the phenomenon, whatever it is, and it's super exciting.
All right, next we have a question from Suburban Gorilla 5515. Now, Russ, he's going to reference here the dog whistle, which viewers you'll recall, Jake said in our last episode, they had a 100% effectiveness when they did this out on the range. His question, curious thought, why does the dog whistle work? Why would NHI curiously respond to this on demand? Can't resist, Pavlovian behavior, anxious to interact.
That is the $1 billion question. I have no idea, and I wish I knew the answer. I don't think they know the answer. What they do know, though, and I think this has been observed at Skinwalker Ranch as well, is that there are certain frequencies that seem to attract the phenomenon. I don't know. I have no idea. It's interesting because I I think if we all knew that, I think there'd be a lot of very annoying humans playing the same frequency and trying to attract the phenomenon. So I can guess that's probably why there's a degree of secrecy about exactly what the frequencies are and the manner in which they're transmitted. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that. And it's a question I'm also asking. What is interesting is if you watch the Skinwalker Ranch series, and I'm not saying that the 1.6 gigahertz frequency is the one that's used for the dog whistle, but in Skinwalker Ranch, they often talk about how they're detecting a frequency from the phenomenon at 1.6 gigahertz. And I do wonder what the connection is. I think this is such a new area of science. And isn't it tragic, though, that, here we are, we're going through this as a story right now. There is a company that has proven very convincingly that they are able to show a correlation between the use of a dog whistle 100% of the time and weird anomalous phenomena turn up and show themselves in broad daylight on camera. Now, I happen to think that's a major story, and we've been covering it very aggressively at NewsNation because it is. It's a very, very important story. It could be the moment that humanity realizes definitively we are not alone. I, for the life of me, do not understand why major newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, TV networks like CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, why are they not engaging with this subject matter? Why is legacy media failing? Ask yourself. They're failing because they're not covering stories like this that we all want told. I think this is a major story. I think what Skywatcher has discovered is, whatever happens with it, groundbreaking. It's extraordinary. They have already, on a preliminary basis, and as they rightly say, there are 6 levels of proof that they want to go through, but they're at the point now where they're attempting further scientific verification and getting close to the possibility of securing independent, objective scientific verification. At what point does the rest of the scientific community and the legacy media get on board and go, wow, this is a discovery. This is really important, guys. This is the thing that I find most disconcerting about this is you're not going to see or hear about this on mainstream media. Why? Why is this issue being suppressed in mainstream media? That to me is the big issue.
All right, Ross, we will go to the next question from Zach Champeau. Hey, Ross, really loved your episode with Jake and Matt. Truly amazed at what Skywatcher is already accomplishing. The question here is, do you get the impression that there is knowledge in these programs pertaining to afterlife or continuation of consciousness after physical human death that is being kept from the public? If this is so, it would be really interesting to learn whether they have a means of communicating with a specific person who has passed on, given they're willing to communicate with them at all at that point.
Wow, this is a controversial area, of course, but yes, short answer. I had a meeting earlier this week with a guy who has had close encounter experiences where he believes he's been abducted. And in the course of my conversation with him, he told me that he also had had an encounter with a spirit of a dead person who'd been murdered. And it was quite chilling because after the fact, I went away and I corroborated certain aspects of what he told me from independent news reports from the time that he was describing. Quite chilling to see that. I do think whatever the phenomenon is, it's too simplistic to describe it as extraterrestrials, little green aliens from the planet Zug, chugging from Zeta Reticuli at warp speed 5, for X hundred years to get to planet Earth and probe humans. I mean, I actually think it's more interesting than that. I do think that there is a distinct possibility that at the heart of all of this is it's also going to answer the ultimate question of what we are as humans. Are we merely meat robots, biological computers, where whatever our consciousness is, it resides in our brains and it dies when we die? Or is our consciousness part of something bigger? And do all humans, whether we realize it or not, have the ability to plug into a non-local consciousness? And could that explain how it is that people are able to allegedly communicate with the dead, or people who are not of this realm? That's an area I'm going down right now. It's funny, when I first got into this subject, I read Leslie Kane's excellent book about surviving death. And I was puzzled as to why Leslie had gone into the area of the afterlife when she'd been covering the UFO subject. And why did she write this excellent book on UFOs and then go on to the subject of the human spirit and spiritualism and the idea of human bodies surviving death? Now I understand the two are inextricably linked. And I'm on this journey as much as you guys are. I'm excited, really excited by what I get in the way of information on a daily basis. Some of it overwhelming, thousands and thousands of emails a week. But one of the consistent things that I get are people who assert an ability to communicate not only with entities from another realm, be it perhaps, I don't know, interdimensional or extra dimensional, I've got no idea. They're also asserting an ability to communicate with not only the dead, but people all around the world. I mean, I've seen things in the last few months that defy explanation. People with alleged remote viewing abilities who, in one case, could actually help somebody find a pair of lost headphones, for example. Where are my headphones? Well, I think you left them here. How did that person know that from thousands of miles away? They remote viewed it. They astral traveled it. I've got no idea. What fascinates me, though, about modern science is if you don't look, you don't find. And one of the problems, one of the issues I have with science, conventional science, is it has this dismissiveness about non-materialist science, that essentially ideas of the paranormal must be complete BS because they can't be. And there's been a tendency, I think, not to even do the research into these ideas. And now at the cutting edge of science, there are people like, for example, Professor Stu Hameroff, talking about the idea of a non-local consciousness. There are people like Gary Nolan talking about the caudate putamen part of the brain, which it's theorized in some people might be larger than in other people and might allow those people an enhanced ability to communicate in the way that we're describing. Are there some people with literally different shaped brains, which gives them the ability to connect their pineal gland with the universe? And I think, for one, that's a very exciting concept. And I think we should be doing the science. Let's science it. And that, frankly, is what Skywatchers is doing. Full credit to them. They're using psionics. And that's a wonderful thing that we're doing funded research to actually examine this idea, because it's bloomingly obvious to me that the United States and other countries, particularly Russia, have secretly been working on psionic technology for much of the last 50 or 60 years. And as Jake Barber says, we don't need the state to prove or enhance what we've already done. We can do it ourselves. And that's what's really exciting about this, is citizen science can prove what the security state has suppressed. And that's why I think we're on the edge of a new paradigm, perhaps the cusp of a discovery that will be momentous, that could be earth-changing. Humans are about to discover a capacity, I suspect, that they never even knew they had.
All right, Ross, we have time for one more. You touched on this a little bit, but we love hearing you rag on legacy media. So this is from @LeeGuy8159. Hi, Ross. I know the chance of you replying to my question is small. Not true, Lee. We got you. But why do you think that mainstream media doesn't report about the UFO subject? Is that they don't want to look like fools, or are world governments stopping them, or is it a bit of both?
Do you know, there's a saying in my line of work, and there's a very vulgar way of saying it, but I'll say it this way, which is always assume a screw-up before a conspiracy. And that's driven my work in investigative journalism for the full length of my career. That when you look at something normally inside government, 9 times out of 10, it really is a balls up than a conspiracy. People very rarely act in concert together to do horrible things. More often than not, the cover-up follows the mistake, and essentially the cover-up is a consequence of trying to hide the mistake. In the media, I don't believe that there is a grey man going around telling the media how to write their stories. But I do know that in major newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, there is an inordinate influence through the national security correspondents by the Pentagon and the intelligence community. Because if you look at the front page of the Wash Post, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, all of the great newspapers of America, they are dependent on a relationship with very senior people in the intelligence community. And look, I've been there. I've done similar things here in Australia. If you keep your nose clean, you get invited to sit down and have a quiet chat with the boss of the intelligence agency, and they give you a very interesting briefing off the record. And this happened to me prior to the Iraq War, where we were all being told there were weapons of mass destruction. And I was given briefings by people in the intelligence community assuring me that we could be very confident as journalists that there were weapons of mass destruction. And then, of course, I followed the war, and I went with different units into Iraq, and of course there were no weapons of mass destruction. And I'm sorry, I will go to my grave believing that there were people in US intelligence and the government who knew full well that that was a lie, and that the media allowed itself to be manipulated. And that, to me, was a real turning point in my journalistic understanding of that relationship between the intelligence community and media. And I've learned to be much more skeptical because of my own mistakes, which I made and which almost every other person in the media made, that we chose to believe the assertions being made by government. I had whistleblowers privately telling me at the time, people who'd been on the weapons inspection teams in Iraq, who were actually saying to me privately, you should be really skeptical about these claims that there are weapons of mass destruction. I don't believe it, they were telling me. And I thought that person was wrong. As it turned out, they were right. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the media at the moment, that there's been so many good stories that have been leaked to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and there is this servile relationship between the national security correspondents, the defense correspondents, and those sources. And if you don't peddle the story the way they want you to peddle it, you don't get invited back for the private briefing. Now, frankly, I'm at the point as a journalist where I think often those private briefings are a complete waste of time because, as we know from the Iraq example, the media were flatly lied to or the people that were doing the briefing were self-deluded. They really should have known better. And it remains, I think, one of the most ignominious moments in US intelligence. It's why I guess I do think the media needs to be more skeptical. And that's the thing that I've realized. I mean, I've done kind of like a doctorate in ufology. I've started out thinking that the whole subject matter was complete bollocks and that I was going to disprove it and find out that it was some secret US research program. And I would commend to any journalist in mainstream media to do the work that I've done, because as you go down this path, there is an aha moment where you go, holy hell, this is real. It is, it's real. And this is the thing, I think in 20 or 30 years' time, when this is an open secret, that the public knows that there is a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet, they will look back at moments like reality checks where we've talked about what we've talked about, and they will question, why didn't the media know this? Why didn't they report what people like Ross Coulthart, Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, Christopher Sharp, some of the people who are covering this issue, NewsNation, why wasn't this being picked up in media? And frankly, I think it will be recorded as the turning point of a transition, that all of these big masthead newspapers no longer have the resources they used to have. When I worked for the Sydney Morning Herald, for example, I was part of an investigative team where you could spend 6 months looking at a story. They had so much money to resource and investigate. Now, they're very lucky if they can scratch together 1 or 2 reporters to investigate a major story. And it's a big problem. The money is going out of the business, and it's going online. And that's the problem, is that there's not something replacing, there's no institutional media online yet that's replacing what's been happening for 50, 60, 70 years in institutional mainstream journalism. The free-to-air networks, they're all effectively going broke. CBS, NBC, ABC, they're slowly dwindling into irrelevance. We get bigger numbers, I'm not being arrogant about this, but we get bigger numbers on Reality Check than most free-to-air television networks get with their TV shows. And it's not talked about. And it's a really interesting issue here that what's happening is most media is not online, but my kids, a lot of people's kids watching this, they're getting most of their information from shows like this online. They're not getting it from free-to-air media or newspapers. My kids don't read newspapers. They don't watch TV news. They think it's hilarious when my wife and I sit down and watch the evening news, sitting there waiting to be spoon-fed the evening news in between advertising. My kids get it from Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, which frankly to me are completely alien ways of extracting news. But what's happening at the moment is there is a transition where mainstream media is largely becoming irrelevant, and nothing underlines their growing irrelevance more than their failure to properly cover the issue, this massive story of UAPs.
All right, Ross, thank you so much. That's all for today. You are off the hook, my friend.
Rant over. You knew I was going to rant, didn't you, Meagan?
I almost skipped that one too, and I was like, God, I just love when he goes off on this one.
No, but I do. I care passionately about this issue because as somebody who's worked in the media for 30, 40 years, I just do not. I find it bewildering knowing what I know. I find it absolutely bewildering that there is so much smoking gun evidence out there that shows that this is a real subject that shouldn't be being stigmatized, shouldn't be being mocked. But the media are allowing themselves to be so egregiously misled. And I think it will go down as the biggest failing, aside from their failures with the failure to properly question whether or not there was a WMDs in Iraq. This will be regarded as one of the single most important moments where the media totally failed to do its job. But we're on the right side of history, Meagan. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Ross. And remember to send your questions to realitycheck@newsnationnow.com for next week.
Thank you all. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.